Twilight 2000 Solo. This video is about my experience playing Twilight 2000 Solo and some of the documents I created to help my game sessions run smoother. Twilight 2000 is an open-world hex crawl in the year 2000. The setting is in Poland or Sweden and mainly focused on military conflict. Your PC and others are just trying to find a safe place to survive after the world governments have collapsed due to World War III. I am currently wrapping up my solo campaign for Twilight 2000. And in this video, I want to share with you some of the changes that I made so that I could enhance my solo game sessions. First thing I did is I changed the map. The game comes with this really nice map of Poland and Sweden. It's double-sided, and this map is made of like a laminate paper. It's just really thick and smooth. And as a solo gamer, table space is important. And I felt this map was just too big. And I also didn't want to play in Poland or Sweden. And on top of that, I didn't want to run a military conflict style game. So I changed the theme of my game to a Y2K theme. And if you're not familiar with what Y2K is, basically in the year 1999, the media frenzy was that computers wouldn't turn over to the year 2000 and that financial institutions would collapse, there would be chaos and riots in the street, and society would go away as we knew it. It was something that just took place. Luckily, in the year 2000, we weren't as reliant on computers as we are today, and nothing happened. So I changed the theme of my game to just fit that Y2K what if scenario. I went with that all the computers collapsed, chaos erupted, and we were all, destined to be on our own. And we were just trying to survive in this new world. So I wanted to bring the map setting into Arizona. I'm familiar with the Arizona landscape, and if there was a Y2K situation, I live in Arizona, so this is where I would have to survive in. It just made it a little bit more realistic for me. So I purchased just a regular Arizona map and just found a section of the map that I wanted my adventure to take place in. Then I just ripped a piece of paper out of this notebook that I have and made a photocopy of the map section that I was using. If you're not familiar with Arizona, this is northern Arizona. It's, Payson, Flagstaff, Winslow. My adventure was taking place over here. My PCs were at the Mogollon Rim Visitor Center, and this was a settlement that was started. The first session is that the settlement got raided, everyone got dispersed. My two PCs that I was mainly running were separated. They had to meet up again in the woods, and then they heard about safety in Winslow of another settlement. So it's just their adventure taking place going over to Winslow, Arizona. And having a photocopy of the map I actually found to be beneficial because I could actually write on the map where they camped, where they had encounters, any type of natural event or human-made event that took place. Like up here, there was a big fire due to an encounter that took place. Over here, there's a village. So if they ever had to double back and go back into the hexes they were already in, there would already be significant landmarks identified on the map, just so that it would just make the game session a little bit more realistic, and I didn't have to go back and refer to notes from days prior or weeks prior. It was just on the map. So I actually found having a photocopy of the map to really help with the game session, because it's just an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper on the table that once I was done using the map, I could just put it to the side and it wasn't in the way at all. If you're going to play Twilight 2000 and use the map provided, I would still recommend making a photocopy of the section you're going to be adventuring in, just so that you can write on it and you can have notes right there handy about what's going on in the area that your PCs are at. The solo rules provided in Twilight 2000 give you a good foundation for your solo adventure. And what I like about the solo rules is they use the encounter cards to answer any of your questions for your oracle or any of the charts. All the cards have a suit in the upper left hand corner, and you would just refer to that suit for whatever portion of the rules that you're using. So if you were trying to create an encounter and you got the 2 of clubs, you would just go up here to the 2. You would just scroll over to the clubs, fight, and that is what would happen. That was what your result would be. If it was a yes/no question that you're asking, you got it right up here. For the yes/no questions, you can use the suit, which is a black suit, which would be a negative, and a 2, which would be a lower value. So that's just different ways you can use the cards. I did like it. It was very helpful, and it kept with the theme of the game because I was still using a product from the game and just using it in a different way, which I found very enjoyable. But I did have to make some changes here. I didn't like referring back to my rule book every time I needed to use one of the charts or look up one of the rules, like I might have forgotten, like the procedures are important. And I kept forgetting certain things, so I'd keep coming back to the procedures. So what I ended up doing was just typing up all the procedures into a document and the charts into a document. I would just keep these in a custom GM screen, and they were just on the table when I needed them, and I could just refer to them. And it was a helpful way of enhancing the game. One of the things I do with my solo adventures is I try not to have to keep referring back to a rule book. I want information easily accessible so that I can stay, with the storyline and not get distracted from my storyline or my creative thoughts, having to look up a rule or look up a chart. I just want to be able to look up, there's the chart, there's my result, keep the story moving forward. Along those lines, I also made a quick reference character sheet. So for my solo session, I had 4 main characters that were running. And in Twilight 2000, you have, standard 1-page character sheets. And most of the information you're going to need is going to be right here with the attributes and skills, because this gives you all your values for your dice rolls. And I kept having to look through all these different pages trying to keep track of my PCs and what their values were. It's one thing when you're playing one character and you can invest in one character. It's different when you're playing multiple characters, and that's one of the things that's hard in any type of solo adventure is role-playing 4 different characters. And sometimes some of your characters just become NPCs, and you don't really role-play them as much. For me, I mainly focused on this character here, which is Morgan, and he was the main person that did everything and my main focused character. But the others were part of the party, and they still did contribute to what was going on in the adventure. So that's why I had to make up this quick reference sheet. And all I did was just wrote down the attributes and their skills and any information that would be necessary for me while playing. So that way I could just look at one piece of paper, have the stats available so I knew which dice to roll. And hey, a 10. I knew what dice to roll, and everything was just easily accessible. The next thing I ended up creating was a travel log. So, Twilight 2000 is a hex crawl, as I've already discussed, and your PCs have to take on certain actions each shift. So, what I ended up having to do was create some sort of a chart just so I could write down what the PCs were doing, some dice results, and other notes that took place during their adventure. This was my first draft. It didn't work too good. I was writing a lot of information down. It became more of a burden. Made some slight modifications to it. I liked it more. I was able to break down the days, the different shifts, so each line became a day versus me tracking each shift individually. Um, some important information about the weather, the terrain, navigation skills, and kind of broke things down, but I was still writing a lot on the chart. So this became my current draft. I still have to make some modifications. I got some typos and things like that. But basically, I have the shifts here: morning, afternoon, evening, night, and I can just cross them out or circle them as they pass. You got your navigation roll, which is important. Every time you enter a new hex, you roll for navigation to see if you get lost. Weather, just like any hex crawl, weather is important because the weather will affect the day, and then your terrain type, which is also important because that will affect your dice rolls. Then I have my list of PCs. I have an F and a W for food and water, and then each shift is broken down. As I said, each PC has to take on a role. So, like this morning shift here, we were just marching. So, when you're moving through a hex, pretty much only one person does anything. That's keeping watch. Everybody else is just marching, and they march through, through the afternoon. Then evening time, they broke down to make camp. Here, I just wrote down what everybody was doing. The F and the P afterwards just means pass or fail. And then over here, I was just making some encounter information and notes and different things like that. One of the important things with making camp is if you do a hidden camp, you need to write down the results of your dice roll. So this is just a handy way to have it available for you in case there's an encounter. It becomes your opposed roll value. These letters are the different shifts that they are taking, and what I created was just a task sheet. These are all the different tasks that can take place while in a hex, and I made a letter code, what the task is, and all the rules associated with the task, the rolls that you would have to make, and any of the terrain modifiers that would affect your dice roll. In this game, a terrain modifier for scrounging would be +1 in the woods. So let's say I'm doing a survival roll and I have a D8 as my value. Well, a +1 in the woods wouldn't just give me a +1 to my dice roll. It actually gives you a +1 in your dice type, swinging your odds more in your favor when going up, and obviously less in your favor when going down. Because in this game, anything a 6 or above is a success, and on some dice, like the D10 and the D12, the higher values give you 2 successes, indicated by the target symbols for successes and the blast markers for failures, critical failures. And those are important when playing the game. It's all outlined in the rules for you. But what I ended up doing is just putting all this information on one sheet. So that way it was in my GM screen. And when I was wanting to do whatever the task was for my PCs, I just had to look up on the chart. I knew what the task was, what the roles were, and if there was any modifications to the roles based on the terrain type. The last thing I created is an NPC chart for all the stats and everything that come with this game. If I was to criticize this game for anything, this would be my only criticism of the game. So in Twilight 2000, you get a deck of cards, and these are encounter cards. Whenever you pull an encounter card, the first thing you look at are the icons on the card. So this particular encounter, the kill zone, can only take place on a road during the day. So if your PCs are not on the road and it's not daytime, this encounter would not take place. So that means no encounter. If you were on the road and it was daytime and you were going to encounter this, the first thing you're going to look at is the number for the encounter. How many combatants are you going to have? And here it says PC times 1. So if you're running 4 characters, you're going to have 4 Soviets in this encounter. But only thing provided on this card about the Soviets is this basic information here, gives what the modifications and everything, but there's no stats for the Soviets. If you open up your referee's manual to the encounters, you get the same information here as you get on the cards. And in order to get your encounter stats, you go to the front of the section, and here's your chart of all the encounter stats, skills, and weapons. I don't, and again, this is just maybe I'm not into designing games and rule books or anything like that, but I just felt they should have just been able to put that information right here. Maybe put less art, smaller art, do something so that I could just refer to the referee's manual and have my stats right next to the encounters that the PCs are facing. Having to flip to the front of the book, the chapter, to get the stats, I don't know. It just seemed a little frustrating, and to me, just a poor design choice. So I went ahead and created this chart here, just basically copied all the information over onto my own document. This way it sat on my GM screen, and when I had an encounter, I'd be able to just look up the information on this chart, and I was done. Speaking of encounters, one of the mechanics in the solo rules I used a lot during this game. So when you pulled an encounter, as I said earlier, you look at the icons, it tells you where the encounter can take place. And if the encounter was to take place, you would actually pull a second card and you'd place it face down underneath. And this actually created a unknown factor about this encounter. So this is just a simple encounter of some hunters. You stumble across, and they've got some prey. So if your PCs decide to engage with this encounter, and you're trying to create a little bit more narrative behind it, you can look at the second card you pulled, and if you get a black suit, it's a negative interaction. If you get a red suit, it's a positive interaction. So with this being a black suit, I could simply say that this hunter is not willing to help, not willing to talk, and becomes very threatening, and we kind of move into what's written here on the card. But if it was red, we could go the opposite, and we could make him a friendly hunter, and he shares some of his meat, and everything is wonderful. And it's just another way of creating an unknown about the encounter. And because you drew a black suit, you could even make it more negative, and maybe the hunter starts shooting at him, and it becomes an armed conflict. So that's one of the mechanics I actually liked about the game. One of the other things I did is if the encounter didn't take place, let's say we were walking on the road and this encounter wouldn't take place, I'm walking on a hex for 6 hours. I feel it kind of felt flat, that there was nothing else to do. We're marching. There's only one person keeping watch. There's no encounter based on the procedures listed. So what I would do is pull out an oracle, and I would start just asking some random questions like, was it a hazard-free travel, such as, no one tripped, no one fell, everybody marched. So I would just start asking some questions on an oracle. I'd also ask, did anybody find anything? There are rules in the game for quick searches. If you stumble across like a vehicle or a building, you can run in real quickly and look. But I kind of felt that there should have been something more during the marching phase, that PCs could just be looking around as they're marching, because they're obviously looking for encounters. But maybe they find stuff. And it could be little trinkets, little doohickeys and whatnots, or just something like a backpack thrown to the side. And, do they go look at the backpack? Do they not? That kind of stuff. Another way of approaching the encounter cards, if you don't want to pull the second card and put it underneath, is you can take the card and you can look at this encounter chart here. And this is the 8 of clubs, so the 8 hunter clubs in camp. So you could actually take this chart and just add a little bit more to the narrative, since it's in camp. However you want to describe that, it could be that the hunters are in camp and they already have secured all the meat and they're actually cooking the meat, or you could just say they're carving up the carcass in a camp and just add a little bit more narrative flavor to your game um, based on the card that you drew for your encounter. So the procedures listed in the solo rules are pretty straightforward. First thing you're going to do at the start of your session is roll for weather. And this is simply just rolling a d6. If you roll a 1, the weather changes one step closer to rain. So I was playing in Arizona, and when I would roll a 1, I just kind of went with that some dark clouds were moving in, just added a little bit of ambiance to my session. The sun was kind of blocked, so traveling was easier. It was a little bit cooler out, and we had some dark clouds. And if I would keep rolling a 1, then it would just turn into rainy weather. And once it starts raining, there's modifiers to travel, and there's also modifiers if there was any kind of shooting encounter for ranged weapons, things like that. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to assign and resolve any tasks. With my travel log, this became kind of easy. I would just list my PCs. I would mark off the shift that the task they were in. So morning, afternoon, evening, night. Navigation roll. Navigation roll is not listed in the procedures. You only do it once when you're entering into a new hex and you're just seeing if you get lost or not. If you get lost, the rules outlined how you would maneuver. I kind of manipulated this rule a little bit because my PCs had a map. The rules give you a +2 to the navigation, but my storyline is they were following a creek, and I found it kind of hard for them to get lost if they were following a creek. So I actually kind of ignored this rule for the most part until they actually went into open terrain. But while they were following the creek, I didn't see any reason to roll a navigation roll. Weather, again, if you fail, I just make a note here. I rolled a 1, so the weather is one step closer to rain. And then here I'm just listing the terrain. So I have my characters. I assign their tasks. Keep watch, march. Here we're making camp. Keeping watch while making camp. Keeping watch is important. You want to make sure one of your PCs is skilled at keeping watch, because if you don't keep watch, encounters can just stumble right on top of you, and then you have a conflict. So, and that would be the next step after you've assigned your task and you've rolled your dice. Again, this chart came in very handy for the task list because I could refer to it real quickly, roll my dice, and move on. Because the next thing you're going to do is you're going to draw your encounter card. And let's say we draw this encounter card. So here we got a forest, daytime, fire, campsite. And we have a forest fire. So now we've just drawn a card or an encounter that could possibly cause them to have to leave camp or leave where they're at or change directions. So what you're going to do after you draw an encounter, depending on which process you're going to go through, using the second card to give you more narrative, or if you're going to use the chart that's provided in the solo rules, 2 of clubs, PCs, and it is fight. So maybe they're going to end up fighting this forest fire. Whatever way you want to draw your narrative, you could use both. It wouldn't hurt to use both. But what you need to do first is figure out where that forest fire is at. When you're on your travel map, these hexes represent approximately 6 miles of travel. So it makes it really hard to figure out where something might be taking place if you're following the rules listed. So in the woods, to determine how far something is from you, you would roll 2d10 and you'd count up the number of hexes. That's 14 hexes. And then you have to pull out an encounter map. Now you got a variety of these different double-sided maps, and hopefully you can find one that fits your terrain features. Since we were following a creek, I just found one with a little bit of a river running through it. And we would then place ourselves on the map, and we would count 14 hexes away for where the forest fire was. The game does come with little chits that you can lay out. I just simply use dice on my map, um, because they're already on my desk while playing, and I didn't want to have a bunch of little cardboard chits laying around. And then you would just count out 14 hexes away, and then boom, there's a forest fire. And it is a two of clubs. You could use this information to say it's a small fire, especially since the chart told you they were going to fight it. So maybe they run over there and they fight the little small forest fire. So it's all these different little tools inside the game that you can um, help with your encounter. But you do switch maps. You go from your travel map to an encounter map so that you can place things in order so that you know where things are at. Especially if this encounter was something a little bit different, like the ambush encounter, which can happen any time of day or night, on a road, in the woods, during the day, during the night, at a campsite. This is just a simple ambush, and if you were to have this on the as your encounter, you would just place yourself on the map and place the encounter where you rolled, and that would be it. And you can find the chart for your encounters in the travel section of the player's manual. On page 138, here is your chart that talks about all your different traveling and roll modifiers for foraging, hunting, and scrounging in the different terrain types and how far your encounters are away from you. So woods were 2d10. Here in the hills, it's 2d10 times 2. So you could end up having encounters pretty far away, and you might have to use a couple of these encounter maps to lay out on the table. If you're not big into putting additional maps on the table, you could use other oracles that are readily available about for how far something is away from you, and you can go more theater of the mind and just kind of get an idea that, yep, there's a forest fire. It's, about a half a mile away from us. We can see the smoke, and the PCs are going to go over there and investigate and maybe help put out the fire. Because for everybody's sake, a forest fire is bad while people are traveling in the forest. So those are the things I created to help my Twilight 2000 solo campaign run a little smoother. I really think the documents I created enhanced the game and just made everything a little bit more accessible for me while playing. One of the things for me as a solo gamer is sometimes the creative juices are just flowing, and I'm writing and things are just happening very organically. And then I've got to stop and look in a rule book to find a chart to get a result. And I tried to avoid doing that as much as possible. First of all, by not using charts as much and going more with the stories and the creative juices that are flowing, but also just having the charts that I'm using easily accessible to me, so that I can just find them on the fly and keep moving forward. And those are the things that I did. I do like the solo mechanics they put in this game. I do feel they actually work quite nicely, but I would recommend a simple oracle on the side to give you a little bit more insight to when you have downtime. If you're walking through a hex and only one person's keeping watch and your encounter card doesn't trigger, well, create something. Create some other narrative to the story. Maybe there's some conflict with the PCs or something. Just whatever your story is, just give yourself something to do and just use maybe an outside oracle if you have to ask those questions. You can use the oracle that's provided, but I like to roll dice, so I use the percentile oracle, and it just added to the game. So thank you very much for watching, and have a great adventure.